The best home I had in 25 years of being homeless was a concrete box that people rent to store old furniture. And understand what I'm comparing it to. I've slept through winters that killed men I knew. I've gone 3 days without a meal. I've been robbed of everything I owned, twice. Those 25 years were the hardest thing I hope you never have to live through. So when I found a 10 by 10 storage unit on the edge of town, behind a gate with a code, I saw something nobody else saw. Nobody knew I was in there. Not the owner, not the manager, not the renters 10 feet away. And inside that box, I had heat, running water, a real bed, and a door that locked from my side. The whole thing cost me $200 to build. My name is Ray Colter, and I'm telling you about the storage unit because out of all of it, that box was the first place where I slept through an entire night. In the next 20 minutes, I'll show you exactly how I built it. The floor, the heat, the water, and the one mistake that almost got me caught. But first, you need to know how a man ends up looking at a storage unit and seeing a home. I didn't fall onto the street. I slid. In 2000, the parts plant where I'd spent my whole working life packed up and moved south, and I found out from a notice, zip tied to a fence. Within 6 months, I'd lost the job, the marriage, and the house, in that order. And one night in the summer of 2000, I was sleeping in the front seat of my car in a parking lot, telling myself it was for a couple of weeks. I was 32 years old. It was not a couple of weeks. The strange part is how normal it felt at first. I still had a phone. I still shaved at a gas station sink and showed up places on time. A man can look employed for a long while after the bottom has gone out from under him. I sold the tools first, then the ring, and I told exactly nobody because shame is quiet like that. By the time the first winter came, the car had stopped being a rough patch and started being the plan. Here's what nobody tells you about living outside. It's not the cold that breaks you, it's the exhaustion. When you sleep in the open, some part of your brain stands guard at the door all night, every night, listening. You wake up 11, 12 times before sunrise, and then the lack of sleep starts making your decisions for you. You get slow, you get short, you forget appointments that mattered. I watched it happen to men around me for years, and somewhere around year 10, I stopped pretending it wasn't happening to me. By the winter, I found that storage facility. I'd been outside for over a decade. I wasn't looking for comfort anymore. I'd given up on comfort. I was looking for one thing, and I could name it exactly. One full night of sleep behind something that locked. That's the whole list. And I want you to hold on to that, because everything I built inside that box, every dollar of that 200 was in service of that one sentence. Here's what I'd figured out by then that most people never think about. A storage unit is already a building. Concrete floor, steel or block walls, a roof that doesn't leak, a door that locks. People pay good money to keep their couches safer than they keep themselves. A 10 by 10 unit is 100 square feet, about the size of apartments that rent for $2,000 a month in Tokyo, and mine was $40 a month. Cash at the counter, a gate code, no credit check, no questions. For a man with no paycheck stubs and no references, that last part mattered as much as the roof. Now I have to say something clearly before I show you anything, because I owe you the truth the same way I'd want it. Living in a storage unit is against the rules of every facility in America, and in most places, it's against the law. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I'm telling you what I did, because the systems I built in there, the floor, the heat, the ventilation, the water, work exactly the same in a van, a shed, a cabin, or a legal tiny home on a piece of land you're allowed to be on. The engineering doesn't care where you put it. The engineering is the part worth keeping. I picked my unit the way you'd pick a campsite in bad country. Ground floor, end of a row, away from the office, on a stretch where the renters were the long-term kind who paid by auto pay and never showed up. Because the best neighbor in a place like that is a neighbor who doesn't exist. The overhead light at my end of the row had burned out. And I'll be honest with you about the kind of man 12 years outside makes you. I was glad it was dark, and I kept my mouth shut about it. The whole build took 9 days and $200. And the order I did it in matters more than any single piece. So I'll give it to you in order. Day one was the floor. And the floor comes first because concrete is a thief. It pulls the heat out of a sleeping body all night long and dumps it into the ground. You can warm the air all you want, but if you're lying on bare slab, the cold is coming up through your back, not down from the ceiling. I'd learned that the hard way on loading docks. So you build a layer of dead air between you and the concrete. Wooden pallets first, free behind almost any grocery store. Rigid foam board on top of those, about $20 a sheet. A piece of cheap plywood over that to walk on. Dead air doesn't conduct heat. That sandwich cost me around $50, and it was the most important $50 of the whole build. Days 2 and 3 were the walls. Steel and block are cold surfaces, and a cold surface steals your warmth by radiation even when the air's warm. The same way you can feel a winter window across a heated room. So you cover them. Foam board, where I could afford it. Moving blankets and Mylar emergency blankets where I couldn't. Shiny side facing in, so they bounce my own heat back at me instead of feeding it to the wall. I hung all of it with the removable adhesive hooks people use for Christmas lights, because I never damaged a thing in that unit, and that was a rule, not a preference. By the end of day 3, I had a room inside the room, a soft, quiet shell that held warmth like a thermos holds coffee. Day 4 was the bed, up on pallets, 18 inches off the floor. Warm air rises and cold air pools at your ankles, and 18 inches is the difference between sleeping in the cold layer and sleeping above it. It sounds too small to matter. It's the difference between shivering and sleeping. Days 5 and 6 were the door. The roll-up door on a unit is loud. It leaks air, and it can be opened by anyone with a bolt cutter and a reason. So just inside it, I built a light wooden frame wrapped in the same insulation, with a real hinge and a barrel bolt that locked from my side. A barrel bolt cost $2 at a hardware store. I'd carried everything I owned on my back for 12 years, and that $2 piece of steel was the first thing in all that time that let my shoulders come down from around my ears. Days 7 and 8 were the kitchen and the storage, and the rule in there was that nothing could look like a home if that door ever rolled up. My kitchen was one gray plastic tote. Closed, it looked like junk. Open, it was a galley. A small electric kettle, a camp bowl, a jug, a wash basin that nested inside. My clothes went into vacuum bags, the kind you pump the air out of, which shrink a wardrobe down to the size of a couch cushion and keep it dry against the block wall. Everything stood stacked near the door in boring boxes, so a stranger's eye would find storage and nothing else. Which was the whole point. Day 9 was power, and I did it the only safe and honest way there is. I did not touch the building's wiring. Tapping into a facility's power is stealing, and amateur wiring in a sealed box full of foam is how you burn to death, and I intended to do neither. I bought one portable power station, a battery in a box with regular outlets, the single biggest expense of the build. I charged it during the day at the library and the laundromat while I lived my normal, visible life, and at night it ran a fan, a lamp, a small pump, a phone, and on the worst nights, a heating pad. A man needs shockingly little power once he stops trying to heat air and starts heating a body. My whole night's load was less than one old light bulb. But a sealed concrete box is also the easiest place in the world to die, so the next part is the part I need you to actually hear. Ventilation first, because it isn't optional and it isn't negotiable. Anything that burns, a candle, a camp stove, a propane heater, makes carbon monoxide. It has no color and no smell, and it kills sleeping people without ever waking them up. In 25 years, I knew of men who went to sleep warm in sealed vans and tents with a burner going and didn't get up. And the reason you never hear their warnings is that nobody survives that mistake to give one. So here was my law, and it's the most important sentence in this video. No flame, no fuel, nothing that burns ever came inside that unit. Not once in 3 winters. Instead, a small 12-volt computer fan sat mounted high in one corner, and a passive vent sat low in the opposite corner. So fresh air crept in low and stale air pushed out high all night, a slow, quiet loop. And a battery-powered carbon monoxide detector hung on the wall the entire time I lived there. $10. If you build any small space and skip that detector, you didn't build a shelter. You built a coffin with a nicer floor. So how do you stay warm with no fire? You don't heat the box. You heat the body, and you trap what the body makes. Between the insulated floor, the reflective walls, the raised bed, and a 0-degree surplus sleeping bag, my own body heat kept that shell 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air with no power at all. The worst stretch I rode out in there was 9 straight days that never climbed above 20 degrees, and I slept through every one of those nights. On the coldest nights, I added 1 electric heating pad, the drugstore kind for a bad back, run off the power station. A heating pad draws a tiny fraction of what a space heater does. It warms the bed instead of the room, and it cannot poison you. That's the entire secret, and it took me a decade outside to learn it. Warm the body, not the box. Now the water, because I promised you running water, and I don't mean a jug with a cup. I mean a faucet. The trick is gravity. Water weighs about 8 pounds a gallon, and it wants to fall, so you let it work for you. A 5-gallon jug went up on a high shelf. A $15 12-volt pump, the kind RV sinks use, wired to a push button. Below it, a basin draining into a second sealed jug on the floor for gray water, which I carried out and emptied properly every time, no exceptions. Push the button and water runs out of a real spout into a real basin. Fill the top jug from the kettle and it runs warm. It wasn't plumbed to the city, but it poured and it drained, and mechanically that's all a faucet is. The whole water system cost about $35. One more thing about water, because this is the corner people cut that puts them in a hospital. Washing water and drinking water are different problems. For washing, any clean tap works. For drinking, you have to be sure, because when you have no safety net, a stomach bug isn't a sick day, it's a crisis that can undo months. My drinking water lived in its own marked jug, filled only from taps I trusted, and every drop went through a $30 gravity filter, the kind hikers carry. 2 systems. Never let them touch. Now the mistake, because I owe you that too. About 6 weeks in, I got the knock. Not police. A facility manager, walking the rows at an hour when nobody walks the rows. I heard the footsteps come down my stretch of concrete and stop outside my door, and I lay there on that raised bed not breathing, and I understood in about 4 seconds every choice I'd made right and the one I'd made wrong. What I'd made right. There was no light leaking under my door because the weather stripping I'd put down for warmth sealed the glow in too. There was no sound because the same insulation that held my heat held my noise. And if that door had rolled up, he'd have seen boring boxes because I'd spent a full day making the front of that unit look like every other unit on the row. What I'd made wrong was the vent fan. It ran on a cheap bearing, and in the cold quiet of 3 in the morning, that little fan had developed a tick. Tick, 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 into a hallway where no sound had any business being. That's what had brought him down my row. The footsteps stood there a long time. And then they moved on, and I spent the next day mounting that fan on a slab of foam, and I never heard it again from 2 feet away, let alone through a door. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Not from fear, exactly, from arithmetic. I lay there going through every other sound, every habit, every pattern I'd let get loose, and by the end of that week I had tightened all of them. An old-timer named Dell, who lived 9 years in a work van parked in plain sight on the same city block, put the rule to me better than I ever could. You never try to look hidden, because hidden looks interesting, and interesting gets reported. You look like you belong, and you look boring, because a bored eye keeps moving. That one idea kept a roof over me longer than any lock ever did. If you want to know my story and all the things I learned out there, go to the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen. So, what was it actually like? Living in 100 square feet of concrete? Stranger and calmer than you'd guess. The first weeks, waking up warm would stop me in my chest, because a body that's braced against cold for years reads warmth as a mistake. It was quiet in a way the street never is. Concrete and foam do to sound what heavy snow does to a city. I learned the building's rhythm the way you learn tides. Mornings, real renters came and went, and I stayed still. Middays were mine. Afternoons I was out, charging the power station, filling jugs, being a normal visible man at a library table that nobody would ever connect to a storage row. Evenings I came back after the office closed, ate nothing that smelled, read by a battery lamp, and slept. And when it rained, the water drummed on that metal roof like fingers on a tabletop, and I would lie there dry and listen to it. And some nights I laughed out loud at how good dry felt. You have to lose dry for a few years before you can hear rain the way I hear it. I won't dress it up. A place like that gives your body privacy, but not your mind. You're always half listening. It's a home and a held breath at the same time. But here's what it gave me that nothing in the 12 years before it had. Sleep. Whole nights of it. And sleep is where everything starts. You cannot sit through a housing appointment, hold a day labor job, or fill out a benefits form on 4 broken hours a night. I know, because I'd been failing at all 3 for years and blaming myself for it. With sleep, I got my head back. And with my head back, I finally had something to build a way out with. That box was never the destination. It was the first solid ground I'd stood on in a decade, and solid ground is what you push off from. If you take the engineering into a van, a cabin, or a legal build, these are the rules I'd carve over the door. Insulate the floor before anything else, because the cold comes up, not down. Warm the body, never the air. Nothing that burns ever comes inside, and the carbon monoxide detector goes on the wall before you spend $1 on comfort. Vent low in, high out, always, especially when it's cold. Keep a fire extinguisher within reach of where you sleep. Look boring, because boring is invisible and dramatic gets discovered. Leave no damage and no trace, and keep your exit in mind from day one, because a shelter is a bridge, not a destination. So think back to that concrete box on the edge of town on some freezing night with a man asleep inside it that nobody in the world knew was there. It had no address I could put on a form, no window, no counter, no name on a lease. By every standard the housing market uses, it barely counted as anything at all. And yet inside those four walls were the only things a human being truly cannot live without: warmth, clean water, a door that locked from my side, and enough quiet to finally sleep, and to finally think, and to finally start back. It turned out the distance between the front seat of a frozen car and a life worth living was about 100 square feet, 9 days of work, and $200 I found a way to make count. Let me ask you something, because the answers to this one always split right down the middle. If you had to disappear for one winter with $200, would you build the storage unit or would you live out of a van? Put your answer in the comments and tell me why, because the van people and the unit people never agree, and both of them are half right. And here's a number to sit with before you go. There are over 50,000 self-storage facilities in the United States. That's more than every McDonald's, Starbucks, and Walmart in the country combined. Millions of small, dry, lockable buildings standing empty in the dark tonight, in a country where 750,000 people have nowhere to sleep. And if you want more from somebody who lived it instead of studied it, subscribe. Because next time I'm going to show you how I made it through my worst winter, 12 below zero, in a van with no engine, and the trick that kept me alive cost less than a cup of coffee. I'll see you in that one.